The avoidant does not regret losing everyone. They do not spend years thinking about the anxiously attached person who pursued them relentlessly, who demanded constant reassurance, who made their emotional state the avoidant's responsibility. They do not carry lasting regret about the person who had weak boundaries, who sacrificed themselves hoping the avoidant would eventually reciprocate, who stayed through patterns that should have sent them running. The avoidant might feel some guilt about how those relationships ended, might have moments of wondering if they could have done better, but they do not experience the specific, haunting, persistent regret that characterizes losing a particular type of person. The type of person the avoidant always regrets losing is someone who possessed a specific constellation of qualities that the avoidant did not recognize as rare until after they were gone. This person was not trying to change the avoidant, was not waiting for them to transform, was not organizing their entire life around the hope that the avoidant would eventually be capable of more intimacy. This person had their own life, their own strength, their own capacity for happiness that did not depend on the avoidant. And precisely because they had all of this, precisely because they were not desperate for the avoidant to be different, they eventually left when the avoidance patterns made it clear the relationship could not become what they needed it to become. This person represented something the avoidant encounters rarely, if ever again. Someone who was both secure enough to be close to the avoidant without anxiety and strong enough to leave when the avoidant's unwillingness to change made staying destructive. Most people the avoidant meets are either too insecure to handle the avoidance patterns without becoming anxious and demanding, or too willing to tolerate harm without boundaries. This person was neither. They could handle the avoidant's need for space without taking it personally, and they could recognize when patterns were not going to change and leave before they became bitter about it. The avoidant does not recognize what they have lost immediately. The initial response to this person leaving is often relief. The pressure is gone. The expectations have disappeared. The avoidant no longer has to manage someone else's needs or navigate someone else's disappointment about their limitations. For weeks or even months, the avoidant experiences the departure as freedom, as confirmation that relationships are easier when you are alone, as evidence that they were right to protect their autonomy so fiercely. The avoidant might even feel slightly vindicated. They told themselves this person was not that into them anyway, was too independent to really care, was keeping their options open the whole time. The fact that this person left seems to confirm these beliefs. The avoidant thinks they were right to not invest too deeply, right to maintain their distance, right to be skeptical about whether this person actually wanted them. The leaving feels like evidence that the avoidant's protective strategies were justified all along. During this initial period, the avoidant might even experience a sense of superiority. They tell themselves they saw through this person's act, recognized that the acceptance was not genuine, understood that the person would eventually leave. The avoidant frames the ending as proof of their wisdom, rather than as loss of something valuable. They congratulate themselves for not getting too attached, for maintaining their walls, for protecting themselves from someone who was going to hurt them eventually anyway. This defensive narrative allows the avoidant to avoid the immediate pain of what they have actually lost, gives them a story that makes the loss feel like a win, transforms abandonment into validation of their protective strategies. The narrative is false, but it is protective, and the avoidant clings to it for as long as they can maintain the illusion that it is true. But then something shifts. The avoidant begins to notice that the space this person left is not filling with anything else. New people they meet do not compare favorably. Relationships they attempt feel hollow or demanding in ways the relationship with this person never felt. The avoidant starts to realize that what they experienced as pressure was actually just normal relationship expectations, that what felt like demands were actually reasonable needs, that what seemed like too much intimacy was actually just basic emotional presence. The person who left was not asking for anything extraordinary. They were asking for what the avoidant should have been capable of providing. And the avoidant let them walk away rather than doing the work to become capable. This realization does not arrive as a single moment of clarity. It accumulates through experiences that keep revealing the same truth. The person who left had something the avoidant desperately needs, but did not know how to value while they had access to it. The regret builds slowly, layering itself into the avoidant's psychology in ways that persist for years, sometimes for the rest of their life. This person becomes the ghost in every future relationship, the standard that no one else quite meets, the evidence that the avoidant is capable of destroying something irreplaceable through their own incapacity. The avoidant begins comparing every new person to this lost person, measuring every new connection against what they had and did not appreciate. They notice how other people's self-sufficiency is performative rather than genuine, how other people's boundaries come with resentment rather than calm clarity, how other people's acceptance is conditional rather than authentic. The more the avoidant experiences relationships that lack what this person offered, the more they understand what they destroyed, the more the regret deepens into something permanent and inescapable. If you are trying to understand what makes certain people haunt avoidance while others fade into forgettable history, if you want to know whether you were this type of person or whether you are still trying to be something the avoidant will eventually regret losing, consider subscribing. We explore avoidant psychology with depth that reveals not just what avoidants do, but why certain losses cut deeper than others, what specific qualities create lasting regret versus temporary guilt, what makes someone irreplaceable versus easily replaced in the avoidant's internal world. The person who had genuine self-sufficiency the avoidant mistook for not caring. The first defining quality of the person the avoidant always regrets losing is genuine emotional self-sufficiency. This was not performed independence, not strategic distance designed to attract the avoidant, not pretending not to need while secretly hoping the avoidant would eventually provide constant attention. This was authentic capacity to maintain emotional equilibrium without requiring the avoidant to regulate their state, to process difficult feelings internally, to find meaning and fulfillment through multiple sources, rather than depending on the relationship to provide everything. The avoidant did not recognize this self-sufficiency as strength while they had access to it. They interpreted it as the person not caring that much, as evidence that the person was not really attached, as confirmation that the relationship was not that important to them. When this person gave the avoidant space without complaint, the avoidant thought it meant they did not mind the distance. When this person processed their own emotions without requiring the avoidant's help, the avoidant thought it meant they were cold or disconnected. When this person maintained their own life and interests outside the relationship, the avoidant thought it meant the relationship was not their priority. The avoidant's nervous system is so accustomed to people who become increasingly dependent over time that genuine self-sufficiency registers as lack of investment rather than as rare capacity. The avoidant has learned to interpret neediness as love, to understand pursuit as caring, to recognize dependence as commitment. When someone does not become progressively more dependent, does not increase their pursuit when the avoidant withdraws, does not demonstrate commitment through sacrifice and accommodation, the avoidance system does not know how to read it. The avoidant assumes this person is not that into them, is keeping their options open, is not serious about the relationship. This fundamental misreading happens because the avoidance template for what love looks like has been shaped by anxiously attached partners. The avoidant has experienced people whose anxiety increased in direct proportion to the avoidant's withdrawal, whose needs became more intense the more the avoidant tried to create space, whose emotional state became more unstable the more the avoidant tried to maintain boundaries. This pattern has become what the avoidant associates with someone being invested, someone caring deeply, someone being truly attached. When this self-sufficient person does not follow that pattern, when they remain calm when the avoidant withdraws, when they maintain their equilibrium, when the avoidant creates distance, when they continue living their full life, when the avoidant is less available, the avoidance system interprets all of this as lack of attachment. The avoidant cannot conceive that someone could be deeply invested while remaining emotionally stable. The avoidant has learned to measure investment by how much someone's emotional state depends on the avoidant's behavior. This person's emotional state did not depend on the avoidant's behavior, so the avoidant concluded they were not invested. This misreading is what allows the avoidant to let them go without immediate panic. The avoidant thinks they are losing someone who is not that attached anyway, someone who will be fine, someone who probably already has other options lined up. The avoidant does not recognize that the self-sufficiency was precisely what made this person's choice to be in the relationship meaningful, that they were choosing the avoidant, not from desperate need, but from genuine desire, that their presence was a gift rather than a dependence. The regret comes when the avoidant encounters the opposite pattern repeatedly. They meet people who do become dependent, who do need the avoidant to regulate their emotions, who do organize their entire lives around the relationship. And the avoidant discovers that this dependence, which they thought they wanted because it feels like love, is actually suffocating. It triggers all their fears about being consumed, about losing themselves, about being responsible for someone else's well-being in ways they cannot sustain. The avoidant realizes too late that the self-sufficient person's independence was not lack of caring, but the exact quality that made the relationship sustainable, that allowed the avoidant to be close without terror, that created space for genuine intimacy rather than obligatory caretaking. The avoidant begins to understand that this person was not less attached because they were self-sufficient. They were more attractive, more valuable, more capable of healthy relationship, because they had done the work of developing internal resources. The avoidant recognizes that they mistook strength for indifference, mistook capacity for coldness, mistook health for lack of investment. And this recognition is devastating because the avoidant understands they pushed away exactly the kind of person their nervous system could have actually tolerated being close to, the kind of person who would not have triggered their defenses if the avoidant had not been so busy misinterpreting their qualities. The person who set boundaries the avoidant interpreted as rejection. The second defining quality is that this person had clear boundaries and maintained them without excessive guilt or explanation. They said no when something did not work for them. They protected their time and energy. They communicated their limits calmly and expected those limits to be respected. They did not apologize excessively for having needs or for declining things that exceeded their capacity. They treated boundaries as normal and necessary, rather than as evidence of selfishness or lack of love. The avoidant experienced these boundaries as rejection. When this person said they were not available for something, the avoidant felt pushed away. When this person communicated a limit, the avoidant felt controlled. When this person protected their energy, the avoidant felt abandoned. The avoidant's nervous system interpreted healthy boundaries as proof that this person did not really want them, did not really care, was keeping them at arm's length for reasons the avoidant could not understand. This interpretation created a dynamic where the avoidant withdrew in response to the boundaries, believing they were protecting themselves from someone who was rejecting them anyway. The avoidant did not recognize that the boundaries were not about pushing them away, but about the person protecting what they needed to protect in order to stay present and engaged. The boundaries were not rejection. They were the mechanism that made sustainable intimacy possible. But the avoidant could not see this because their wounding made them interpret any limit as abandonment. The avoidant's history shapes this interpretation in specific ways. If the avoidant's early attachment figures were inconsistently available, the avoidant learned that other people's needs for space, or time, or energy meant complete abandonment. When a parent said they needed alone time, it meant hours of neglect. When a parent set a limit, it came with emotional withdrawal or punishment. The avoidant internalized that boundaries are threats, that limits mean rejection, that someone protecting their energy means they are pulling away entirely. When this person set boundaries in their relationship, all of those old associations activated. The avoidant could not distinguish between healthy boundary setting and emotional abandonment. They could not recognize that this person saying no to something specific was not the same as rejecting the avoidant entirely. The avoidance system defaulted to the childhood template. Boundary equals abandonment, limit equals rejection, protecting energy equals not caring anymore. What made this particularly confusing for the avoidant is that this person remained consistently present, even while maintaining boundaries. They said no to specific requests, but continued showing up for the relationship. They protected their time, but made quality time when they were available. They maintained limits, but demonstrated care within those limits. The avoidance system could not process this combination. It was too foreign to their experience. So, the avoidant kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, kept expecting the boundaries to eventually mean full withdrawal, kept testing whether the person would abandon them, the way the avoidance childhood taught them to expect. The regret comes when the avoidant encounters people who have weak or non-existent boundaries. These people say yes to everything the avoidant asks. They accommodate every pattern. They sacrifice their own needs to meet the avoidant's needs. And at first, this feels like love to the avoidant. It feels like finally being with someone who really wants them, who really accepts them, who really prioritizes the relationship. But over time, the avoidant discovers that people with weak boundaries eventually collapse under the weight of their own accommodation. They become resentful about all the sacrificing they have been doing. They explode with anger about needs they never clearly communicated. They guilt-trip the avoidant about everything they gave up. Or they become so depleted that they have nothing left to offer, become hollow versions of themselves who stayed too long at too high a cost. The avoidant realizes that the person with strong boundaries never did any of this. They never became resentful because they never agreed to things they could not sustain. They never exploded because they communicated their limits clearly from the beginning. They never became depleted because they protected their energy consistently. The boundaries the avoidant experienced as rejection were actually protection for both people, were the thing that would have allowed the relationship to be sustainable long-term if the avoidant had not been so busy feeling rejected by them. The avoidant understands too late that this person's boundaries were not about not wanting them. They were about wanting the relationship to work, about protecting the conditions under which intimacy could be sustained, about preventing the resentment and depletion that destroy relationships when people sacrifice too much for too long. The avoidant pushed away someone who knew how to protect the relationship by protecting themselves, and the loss of that wisdom becomes more painful the more the avoidant encounters people who do not possess it. The person who left when the pattern became clear rather than waiting for change. The third defining quality is that this person had the strength to recognize when the avoidance patterns were not going to change and to leave before they became bitter or broken. They did not stay for years hoping the avoidant would transform. They did not sacrifice themselves trying to love the avoidant into wholeness. They gave the relationship a genuine chance, communicated their needs clearly, waited to see if the avoidant would do the work of addressing their attachment wounds. And when it became clear that the avoidant was not going to do that work, when the pattern repeated enough times to prove it was pattern rather than phase, this person left. The avoidant did not appreciate this at the time. The avoidant experienced the leaving as the person giving up too easily, as evidence that they did not really love them enough to stay through difficulty, as confirmation that people always leave eventually, so it is better to not get too attached. The avoidant told themselves that if this person really cared, they would have been more patient, would have given more chances, would have understood that the avoidant needed more time. But the avoidant was confusing patience with enabling. This person was patient. They stayed through multiple cycles of the pattern. They forgave repeated hurts. They communicated their needs multiple times in multiple ways. What they did not do was stay indefinitely while the avoidant made no effort to change. They recognized the difference between someone who is struggling to grow and someone who is not trying to grow at all. The avoidant was the latter. And this person had enough self-respect to leave rather than destroying themselves, waiting for transformation that was not coming. What this person understood that the avoidant did not is that staying in a relationship where your needs are consistently unmet does not demonstrate love. It demonstrates a lack of self-respect, a confusion about what you deserve, an inability to protect yourself from harm. This person knew they deserved someone who was capable of meeting their needs, who was willing to do the work of becoming capable if they were not capable yet. The avoidant was neither capable nor willing, and this person refused to martyr themselves, hoping that would change. The avoidant interpreted this clarity as coldness, as lack of real attachment, as evidence the person was not that invested. But clarity is not coldness. It is wisdom. This person was clear about what they needed, clear about whether the avoidant was providing it or working toward providing it, clear about the timeline after which staying would become self-destructive. The avoidant experienced this clarity as threat because it meant the person would not wait forever, would not tolerate the pattern indefinitely, would leave if the avoidant continued refusing to change. The regret comes when the avoidant realizes how rare it is to find someone who has both the capacity to love them and the strength to leave them. Most people the avoidant encounters are either strong enough to leave quickly or loving enough to stay forever, but rarely both. The people who leave quickly do not give the relationship a real chance, do not see past the avoidant's defenses to the wounded person underneath, do not offer the kind of patience that would have allowed something genuine to develop. The people who stay forever become increasingly damaged by the avoidance patterns, become bitter or anxious, or smaller versions of themselves, become people the avoidant eventually does not respect or want. This person did both. They loved the avoidant enough to give the relationship genuine investment, to see past the defenses, to offer real patience through difficulty. And they loved themselves enough to leave when it became clear that staying was destroying them, when the avoidant's unwillingness to change made it obvious that the relationship could not become what they both needed. This combination of genuine love and genuine self-respect is vanishingly rare, and the avoidant did not recognize its value until they spent years encountering people who had one or the other, but never both. The avoidant begins to understand that this person leaving was not failure of love. It was success of wisdom. This person understood what the avoidant did not understand, that you cannot love someone into healing, that staying with someone who refuses to do their work is not faithfulness, but self-destruction, that real love includes protecting yourself from people who are not capable of treating you well. The avoidant realizes they lost someone who was strong enough to love them, and strong enough to leave them. And that particular combination is what they spend the rest of their life looking for without finding it again. The person who genuinely liked who the avoidant was without trying to change them. The fourth defining quality is that this person genuinely accepted the avoidant as they were. They were not tolerating the avoidance patterns while hoping they would change. They were not being patient as a strategy to eventually get something different. They actually liked the avoidant's need for space, appreciated their independence, valued their emotional restraint, respected their boundaries. Everything about them communicated that they wanted this version of the avoidant, not some future transformed version. The avoidant did not trust this. The avoidant has spent their entire life receiving the message that who they are is wrong, that their natural patterns are problems to be solved, that love is conditional on becoming more emotionally available, more open, more capable of intimacy. When someone genuinely accepts them without that pressure, the avoidant experiences it as too good to be true, as a setup, as something that cannot possibly last. The avoidant waits for the moment when this person will reveal that the acceptance was temporary, that they were just being patient until the avoidant was ready to change. But that moment never comes because this person's acceptance is real. They genuinely enjoy the avoidant's company without needing them to be different. They appreciate getting space when the avoidant needs it because they value their own alone time. They like that the avoidant does not require constant emotional processing because they process internally themselves. They respect that the avoidant has strong boundaries because they have strong boundaries too. The fit is genuine, not performed. The avoidant has internalized from past relationships that acceptance is always conditional, that people claim to accept you, but what they really mean is they accept who you are now, while waiting for you to become who they actually want. This person was different. Their acceptance came without that hidden agenda, without that future orientation, without that pressure to transform. They wanted the avoidant exactly as the avoidant presented, found the avoidance patterns complementary rather than problematic, experienced the avoidance way of being as attractive rather than as something to tolerate until change happened. The avoidant cannot believe this fit is real, so they keep testing it. They withdraw more to see if the person will panic. They create more distance to see if the person will pursue. They maintain more independence to see if the person will try to make them dependent. And this person just continues being exactly who they are, continues not needing the avoidant to be different, continues appreciating the relationship for what it actually is, rather than for what it could potentially become. This consistent acceptance is what the avoidant cannot process. It does not match their internal model of how relationships work. It challenges everything they believe about intimacy requiring transformation. Eventually, the avoidant decides that this person must not really care that much, must not be that attached, must not need the relationship enough for it to be real. The avoidant leaves or creates conditions that force the person to leave, believing they are protecting themselves from eventual disappointment when this person finally reveals they want the avoidant to change. The regret comes when the avoidant spends years encountering people who do want them to change. People who say they accept the avoidant, but whose behavior reveals they are waiting for transformation. People who tolerate the avoidance patterns for a while but eventually start pushing for more openness, more availability, more emotional expression. People who frame it as helping the avoidant grow, or supporting the avoidance healing but whose underlying message is clear. Who you are right now is not enough. The avoidant realizes that the person who genuinely accepted them was not lying, was not performing, was not waiting for them to be different. That acceptance was real. That person actually wanted the avoidant as they were, and the avoidant destroyed it because they could not believe it was possible, because their wounding made them interpret authentic acceptance as indifference, because they were so convinced that everyone eventually wants them to change, that they could not recognize someone who genuinely did not. This realization creates profound regret, because the avoidant understands they will probably never find this again. The combination of genuine acceptance and genuine strength to leave is rare enough. Finding someone who genuinely accepts the avoidant exactly as they are while also being someone the avoidant is attracted to and respects is vanishingly rare. The avoidant destroyed something irreplaceable, not because it was not working, but because they could not believe it was working, could not trust that someone could actually want them without needing them to transform. The person whose absence created a void nothing else fills. The fifth defining quality that makes this person unforgettable is that their specific presence created something in the avoidant's life that no subsequent person or experience manages to recreate. This was not just about the person being attractive or compatible or good for the avoidant. It was about the particular way this person related to the avoidant, the specific kind of space they created, the unique quality of connection they offered that the avoidant has not encountered before or since. When this person was present, the avoidant experienced something they rarely experience, the ability to be close to someone without constant terror. The person's self-sufficiency meant the avoidant was not drowning in someone else's needs. Their boundaries meant the avoidant knew where the limits were and could relax within them. Their lack of pressure to change meant the avoidant could be themselves without performance. Their genuine acceptance meant the avoidant did not have to constantly monitor whether they were being enough. The avoidant did not recognize this as special while they had it. They thought this was just what relationships feel like when you are with someone you are not that into, when someone is not that into you, when the intensity is not there. The avoidant confused the absence of anxiety with absence of depth, mistook the lack of drama for lack of importance, interpreted the ease as evidence that the relationship was not significant. The avoidance nervous system has been trained to associate love with anxiety, to interpret emotional turbulence as proof of deep connection, to understand intensity as evidence of significance. When a relationship does not produce constant anxiety, when there is ease and steadiness and calm, the avoidance system does not recognize it as valuable. The avoidant thinks something is missing, that the connection is not deep enough, that the relationship does not matter enough. The avoidant does not understand that ease is the goal, that calm is the foundation of sustainable intimacy, that the absence of anxiety is what allows real closeness rather than what indicates lack of closeness. After this person leaves, the avoidant tries to recreate what they had. They pursue new relationships. They try different types of people. They attempt to find someone else who creates that same ease, that same lack of pressure, that same ability to be close without terror. And they cannot find it. Every new person either triggers the avoidance defenses immediately or turns out to be someone the avoidant is not attracted to. The specific combination of qualities this person had does not present itself again, or when it does, the avoidant has become too guarded to trust it, too scared of repeating the mistake to allow themselves to engage fully. The void this person left becomes more apparent over time. The avoidant notices it in moments of stress when they wish they could talk to this person, because this person had a way of listening that did not make the avoidant feel judged or pressured to solve things immediately. The avoidant notices it in moments of quiet, when they miss the specific companionship this person offered, the way they could sit in silence together without the silence feeling awkward or empty. The avoidant notices it in moments of accomplishment when they wish they could share with this person because this person celebrated the avoidant's successes without making them feel obligated to then celebrate their successes in return. The avoidant begins to catalog all the ways this person was uniquely suited to them, all the ways their specific qualities created exactly the conditions under which the avoidant could have sustained intimacy if they had been willing to do the work. This person understood the avoidant's need for space without taking it personally. They matched the avoidant's emotional restraint without demanding more vulnerability. They respected the avoidant's independence without competing for importance. They created safety without creating dependence. What devastates the avoidant is recognizing that this person's qualities were not just attractive in isolation, but formed a system that perfectly addressed the avoidant's specific needs and fears. Each quality reinforced the others, creating a relational environment where the avoidant could have learned to be close without the terror that usually accompanies intimacy. The self-sufficiency reduced engulfment fears. The boundaries created predictable structure. The lack of pressure to change allowed authentic presence. The genuine acceptance made vulnerability less terrifying. Together, these qualities created the exact conditions the avoidant needed but could not recognize until they were gone. The regret becomes permanent when the avoidant accepts that they will not find this again, that this particular combination of person and circumstance and timing was once in a lifetime, that they destroyed their best chance at sustainable intimacy because they did not recognize it was their best chance until it was gone. The void this person left does not fill, because it was not a generic void, but a specific absence, not a space that anyone could occupy, but a space shaped exactly like this particular person's presence. The avoidant discovers that you cannot replace someone who was irreplaceable, cannot recreate what was unique, cannot find again what you destroyed through not recognizing its value while you had it. Why the regret intensifies rather than fades over time. The regret about losing this specific type of person does not follow the normal trajectory of relationship loss. Typically, when relationships end, the initial pain is intense and then gradually decreases as time passes, as new experiences accumulate, as the person moves on with their life and develops new attachments. The acute grief softens into occasional nostalgia, and eventually into acceptance that the relationship served its purpose and ended when it was supposed to end. But the regret about losing this person does not soften with time. It intensifies. The initial relief of having them gone gives way to growing awareness of what was lost. The longer the avoidant goes without finding someone who possesses the same rare combination of qualities, the more they understand how irreplaceable this person was. Every new relationship that fails, every pattern that repeats, every person who turns out to be wrong in predictable ways, all of it reinforces that this person was different, was special, was the exception. The avoidant will not encounter again. The intensification happens because the avoidant's understanding of what they lost deepens over time. Initially, they understood only at a surface level that they lost someone good. As years pass, they begin to understand the specific ways this person was good, the particular qualities that made them rare, the exact constellation of characteristics that created the possibility for sustainable intimacy. This deepening understanding makes the loss more painful rather than less, because the avoidant cannot unknow what they now know about how rare this person was. The avoidant initially tells themselves stories that minimize the loss. They tell themselves this person was not that special, that they will find someone better, that the relationship was not working anyway. These stories protect the avoidant from the full weight of what they destroyed. But as years pass, and the avoidant encounters person after person who lacks what this person had, the protective stories collapse. The avoidant can no longer pretend this person was ordinary, can no longer tell themselves that finding someone with these qualities is just a matter of time, can no longer avoid the truth that they had something irreplaceable and destroyed it. The intensification also happens because the avoidant accumulates experiences that keep proving the same point. They try to date people who are more dependent and discover that dependence is suffocating. They try to date people who pursue them and discover that pursuit triggers their defenses. They try to date people who tolerate their patterns indefinitely and discover they lose respect for people who have no boundaries. Every new relationship becomes another piece of evidence that the person they lost was operating at a completely different level, possessed qualities the avoidant did not know how to value at the time. The avoidant also begins to recognize their own role in the loss more clearly as time passes. Initially, they blamed the person for leaving, told themselves that if this person really loved them, they would have stayed, convinced themselves that the person gave up too easily or did not try hard enough or was not really that into them. But as the avoidant matures, as they gain perspective, as they watch themselves repeat the same patterns with new people, they begin to understand that the person did not leave because they did not love the avoidant. They left because the avoidant was not willing to do the work, because staying would have destroyed them, because they had enough self-respect to protect themselves from a relationship that could not become what they needed. This recognition of their own culpability makes the regret more painful, because it removes the protective layer of blame. The avoidant can no longer tell themselves that this person was wrong to leave, that they were not patient enough, that they did not really care. The avoidant has to face that they destroyed this themselves through their unwillingness to change, through their inability to recognize what they had until it was gone, through their patterns that drove away exactly the kind of person they needed most. The regret becomes a permanent fixture in the avoidant's psychology because it serves a function. It reminds the avoidant of what is possible, keeps the memory of someone who could have been right for them if they had been capable of meeting that person's needs, holds space for the knowledge that their attachment patterns have real costs, that are not abstract, but concrete and painful. This person becomes the ghost that haunts all future relationships, the standard that no one else quite meets, the evidence that the avoidant is capable of losing something truly valuable through their own limitations. What the avoidant finally understands too late, The avoidant eventually understands, often years after this person has left, that they were not afraid of intimacy with this person. They were afraid of their own capacity for intimacy, afraid that even with someone perfectly suited to them, they would still fail. Afraid that if they tried to be close to this person and could not sustain it, they would have to face that. The problem is truly internal rather than a matter of not yet finding the right person. This person was the right person, and the avoidant still could not do it. And that realization is more terrifying than losing them. The avoidant understands that this person leaving was mercy. If this person had stayed, the avoidant would have continued hurting them while doing none of the work to change. The relationship would have slowly poisoned both of them, would have turned this person into a bitter or anxious or diminished version of themselves, would have confirmed the avoidant's belief that intimacy destroys people. By leaving when they did, this person protected both of them from that slow destruction, saved themselves from becoming unrecognizable, saved the avoidant from having to watch someone they cared about deteriorate, while refusing to change the behavior, causing the deterioration. The avoidant understands that the qualities they misinterpreted were exactly the qualities that made this person capable of healthy relationship. The self-sufficiency they thought meant the person did not care was what would have made sustainable intimacy possible. The boundaries they experienced as rejection were what would have prevented resentment and burnout. The strength to leave was what proved this person loved themselves enough to eventually have loved the avoidant. Well, if the avoidant had been capable of receiving that love. The avoidant understands that they will probably not find this combination again, because it requires someone to have done enormous personal work, to have developed capacities most people do not develop, to have achieved a level of secure attachment that is rare and precious. The avoidant meets many people who have some of these qualities, but not all of them. They meet self-sufficient people who cannot leave bad situations. They meet people with strong boundaries who are not self-sufficient. They meet people who leave easily, but who never gave the relationship real investment. The specific combination this person had is lightning in a bottle, and the avoidant used up their chance at it. The avoidant understands with devastating clarity that this person represented their best statistical chance at sustainable intimacy. Not because they were perfect, not because the relationship had no challenges, but because their specific qualities created the exact conditions under which the avoidant's nervous system could have learned to tolerate closeness. This person would not have triggered the avoidant's fears of engulfment because they were genuinely self-sufficient. They would not have triggered the avoidant's fears of losing independence because they valued their own independence. They would not have made intimacy feel threatening because they did not need intimacy to be different from what it was. The avoidant understands that even if they did the work now, even if they spent years in therapy addressing their attachment wounds, even if they developed the capacity for intimacy they did not have when this person was present, it would not matter because this person is gone. They have moved on. They have built a life that does not include the avoidant. They have probably found someone else who is capable of meeting them, who did not need years of therapy before being able to show up. The avoidant's eventual transformation, if it happens, will benefit whoever comes next, but cannot undo the loss of this person. The avoidant understands with painful specificity that the window of opportunity with this person was finite and has closed. This person gave them time to show up differently, communicated what they needed, waited to see if the avoidant would do the work. When the avoidant did not do the work, when the pattern continued, when it became clear that nothing was going to change, this person protected themselves by leaving. The window closed not because this person was impatient, but because they had the wisdom to recognize when someone is not willing to change, and the self-respect to stop waiting for transformation that is not coming. The avoidant understands that this is what regret actually is. Not wishing you had made a different choice when you did not have the capacity to make a different choice, but understanding that your lack of capacity at a crucial moment cost you something irreplaceable, that the person you were then destroyed the possibility for the person you might eventually become. That some losses teach you what you should have known, but cannot give you back what you lost through not knowing it sooner. What the avoidant always regrets about losing this type of person is not just the loss of the relationship, but the loss of the possibility the relationship represented. This person proved that the avoidant could be close to someone without terror if that someone possessed the right qualities, and if the avoidant was willing to do their work. The avoidant was not willing, and now that possibility is gone. The avoidant spends the rest of their relational life comparing everyone to this person, measuring everyone against this standard, carrying the knowledge that they once had, exactly what they needed, and let it slip away because they could not recognize it for what it was until it was too late to matter. The regret serves as both punishment and teacher, as constant reminder and painful lesson. It punishes the avoidant for their unwillingness to change when change would have made a difference, reminds them daily that their patterns have real costs that are not theoretical, but personal and permanent. It teaches the avoidant what to value, what to recognize, what to fight for if by some unlikely miracle they encounter it again, though they probably will not, because people like this do not stay available forever, do not wait indefinitely, and the avoidance window has closed. The regret becomes permanent because the loss was permanent, because this specific person will haunt every future relationship, because the avoidant finally learned what they should have known, but learned it too late, to save what they lost through not knowing it when it mattered most.